Trump's actions have created a constitutional crisis, scholars say. That was the New York Times. And Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland condemns President Trump and Elon Musk's illegal and unconstitutional abolition of U.S. aid at press conference outside the agency. Hello, members, super savers, and bond course fans. I hope you're healthy and well. So, we may not only have a debt crisis on our hands in the U.S., it seems we may have a constitutional crisis as well. And many thanks to all of you who have continued to reach out about your ongoing concerns about the second Trump administration and what this all means for your money. I hope today's video will help lift the fog a bit and maybe even let you sleep a bit better tonight. So, I don't recall the words unconstitutional, illegal, and unprecedented used this often, ever in the news. But according to some of you, that's because I'm still young, although my kids would beg to differ. In any case, there are usually at least two sides to every story. So let's go through both today and see what we can make of them and who might be right on which parts of the argument. Here are the three topics that we'll be covering in today's video. 1. Do we have a debt crisis on our hands? 2. Are we in the midst of a constitutional crisis as well? And 3. What's really different this time? And should you pull your money out of the U.S.? And as usual, here's our front of video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. Do we have a debt crisis on our hands? Few in our Diamond NestEgg community will disagree with me when I say that the national deficit is a fairly big headache, especially given how many treasuries we all hold in our portfolios, and even more so when we look at the latest official numbers from the Treasury. You could even argue that we are at the beginning of a potential debt crisis. Our national deficit is sharply up for this fiscal year. Compared to the national deficit of $532 billion for the same period last year, our national deficit has increased by $308 billion. That's a whopping and worrying 58% increase, from only $532 billion for the period from October 2023 to January 2024 to about $840 billion for the corresponding period of the current fiscal year at the time of this taping. And by the way, this deficit comes on top of a national debt pile that currently stands at around $36.2 trillion and has not stopped growing, which also means that we may have to face another one of our recurring debt ceiling crises again, somewhere between June and August of 2025. On this channel, we've been speaking about the deficit and the debt ceiling regularly, as well as the need to balance growth and spending in order to bring our deficit under control. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty here on why the deficit is up so much, and what the outgoing administration did or didn't do to leave its successor with these numbers. It's been less than a month since President Trump's second inauguration, so it sounds reasonable to assume that this 58% year-over-year increase in the national deficit can't really be related to what the current administration has been up to so far. So, if you didn't think we had a debt crisis before President Trump was inaugurated on January 20th, then you probably wouldn't think that we have a debt crisis right now. If, on the other hand, you thought we had a debt crisis before January 20th, then you probably are still thinking along those same lines. Personally, we're somewhere in the middle. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If our economy continues to grow at the same pace or faster than our debt, we may be able to sidestep a real debt crisis with some less dramatic interventions. That said, economic growth is not a given, and we can't just sit around, do things like we've always done before, and simply pray that higher economic growth will outpace our spending. So it's clear that any new administration, including the current Trump administration, does have to do something to rein in our deficit and debt so that we can avoid that fully blown out debt crisis. And as we all know, there are two ways in principle to reduce a deficit and maintain the credit worthiness, the full faith and credit of our nation. Raise more taxes or spend less. And President Trump is not a fan of tax increases. During his campaign, he has always stressed that he wants to cut costs and potentially even lower taxes as his way to address the issue. And from the beginning, he has prominently positioned Elon Musk to be his spearhead for finding and eliminating unnecessary costs in the federal administration. And that's what Musk has been setting out to do with the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE for short. Now, Musk has been on a mission ever since President Trump retook the Oval Office, and he has proceeded at a speed and scale that few had expected and that some are uncomfortable with, as we discussed in this recent video on Musk and your treasuries, linked below in the first pinned comment for reference. Of course, reasonable people can agree or disagree with Musk's priorities and approach. It's never easy to find cost reductions that will not hurt someone somewhere, and some may even have preferred to rely more on tax raises to get the deficit better under control, as Kamala Harris was proposing during her campaign. These are all legitimate political arguments, but as usual, in our litigious country, almost any question of importance is also being brought before the courts. And some of the opponents of what DOGE is doing, including Democrat-controlled states and unions, have already been launching lawsuits against the government where they feel that the administration is overstepping its boundaries. On the other side of the political divide, though, and as we all would have expected, the administration is defending its conduct robustly. From Real Clear Politics, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters at Wednesday's briefing that many outlets in this room have been fear-mongering the American people into believing there is a constitutional crisis taking place here at the White House. To put this all a bit into context, it may surprise some folks, but nearly every president, both Democratic and Republican, has gotten sued for overreaching and stepping outside the boundaries of his constitutional power. It happened most recently to Biden as well, when he tried to cancel student loans by decree and without the approval from Congress. And sometimes one side wins and sometimes the other, which brings us nicely to the next section of today's video. Are we in the midst of a constitutional crisis as well? So last week, Vice President J.D. Vance posted on X that judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power, which immediately set off a series of warnings of a constitutional crisis, including this one from MSNBC. And then emails like this one started coming into our Diamond NestEgg mailbox. Can Trump dismantle other agencies, those that sell bonds, like he did USAID and is doing to the Department of Education and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? Wondering if agencies would be a bad idea, both now and any time in the future, since really power now only rests in the president. The Supreme Court has seen that he can do anything he wants, and Congress is irrelevant. So this email actually has a lot of good questions, and to all of you who've sent in similar ones along these lines, I will try to address as many as I can in this month's live member Q&A on Sunday, February 23rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time. For this section of today's video, let's focus on this. Are we really in the midst of a constitutional crisis? And if yes, how serious is it? The Oxford Dictionary defines a constitutional crisis as a situation in which a major political dispute cannot be clearly resolved on the basis of the particular government's constitution or established practice. But what people often really mean when they say constitutional crisis in the heat of a political battle is this. They are accusing their opponent of violating the Constitution, which is a grave charge. Now, J.D. Vance is a graduate of Yale Law School. So assuming that the educational system more or less still works in our country, the vice president in all likelihood would not have set off this post without weighing every single word. And so we can only interpret that what he is really saying is this. Our Constitution establishes a clear separation of power among the three branches of government that has served the U.S. well over the past 200 years, as I talked about in this recent video on the Trump administration and your treasuries, also linked below in the first pinned comment. And I'll be honest, there are very few things in my life that have made me cry. My intro to law class in college, though, that was one of them. I mean, who can read that many pages in one night? I ended up switching to Intro to Statistics instead, one of my best college decisions. And even more ironic, I then married a law school grad who decided not to be a lawyer anymore. Let's just say our family has had many fascinating dinner conversations about the Constitution. In any case, here's a basic overview of the separation of power among our three branches of government. Congress sets the laws for the country. The president, with his administration, implements and executes these laws. And the judiciary, our judges, decide whether the law has been followed properly, including the Constitution. In this system, Congress, the President, and the courts do balance and check each other at multiple levels. But the flip side is also true. In our system, every branch of government keeps its own clear area of responsibility as well. Areas of responsibility where the other functions should not interfere. Congress should not decide on individual legal disputes. The administration should not make new laws. And judges should not run the administration of the federal government. And if this actually is what J.D. Vance means, I would venture the guess that most constitutional scholars would agree with him, because then he's only describing how a system of checks and balances works. The branches of government complement and control each other, but do not interfere unnecessarily in the workings of the other branches' core areas of responsibility. And by the way, if you wonder how these thorny questions get resolved in real life, the final arbiter of how far the powers of the president go will be our judiciary in the form of the Supreme Court, as it always has been. A real constitutional crisis would only happen if Trump decided to ignore or violate a court decision, but there's no sign of that and never has been so far. President Trump, during his first administration, like every president before him, has always respected the Supreme Court's decisions. He may not have liked many of them, but as far as we know, he's always followed them, and we can only assume that he will continue to do so in his second term. Now, as I just said, the ultimate arbiter of which actions by the administration are constitutional and which ones are not will be the Supreme Court. So we will need to wait until the lawsuits against the Trump administration make their way up there to get clarity. In the meantime, we can only make educated guesses about which of the actions of the current administration might be validated and which not. In this recent article, the Wall Street Journal puts the decisions that are being challenged in 3 buckets. The first bucket. This includes decisions on discretionary federal spending. This is clearly a core competency of the administration, so decisions like defunding U.S. aid or reducing the federal workforce should, in principle, stand on safe legal grounds. There will surely be discussions about one aspect or another and whether due process has been followed, but unless Congress explicitly mandates a certain expense or grants an individual entitlement to the recipient of a payment, such as for Social Security, it is basically the administration's right and responsibility to manage spending within the limits given by Congress and to make sure the government doesn't default. The second bucket. This is for responsibilities that are somewhat shared between the president and Congress, and the decisions of the Supreme Court might go either way. So while the administration can probably reduce U.S. aid spending on its own, it's less clear whether the president can completely abolish an agency that has been created by law without asking Congress for approval. What this potentially means is that U.S. aid might be around for a while, although presumably with a much reduced budget. That said, in these gray zones, most presidents are tempted to stretch it a bit, as Obama did with his Clean Power Act, and Biden did with the student loan cancellations that I mentioned before. And then, like now, it was up to the Supreme Court to ultimately decide what was and what wasn't constitutional. And for those of you who may remember, in 2014, Obama actually told Republican lawmakers, "So sue me," when they objected to his use of executive actions. One of the key differences between now and then is this. No one seemed to care to cover Obama's "so sue me" moment all that much. I can't even imagine how many more emails we would receive if this article was showing Trump's picture. Moving on now to the third and final bucket. Some of Trump's early decisions seem to go against precedents, unless precedent is overturned or refined. For example, the decision not to grant birthright citizenship to the children of illegal immigrants seems to violate the precedent set by the United States versus Wong Kim Ark case that the Supreme Court decided in 1898. So in this situation, the Supreme Court could either reinstate birthright citizenship for everyone born on American soil, or it could redefine the interpretation of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution more narrowly. For example, children born to foreign diplomats on American soil do not automatically become U.S. citizens because they are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So the legal argument before the Supreme Court will most likely be fought over the definition of the 5 words, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, meaning of the United States, which provides the perfect transition to the last section of this video. What's really different this time, and should you pull your money out of the US? So, as we've just shown you, our presidents, whether it be President Trump or former Presidents Biden and Obama, they have all tried to push the envelope on what is within their executive powers, and they have all been sued for it. Kennedy, Bush, Reagan, Clinton are just a few more former US presidents we can add to the list. We live in a litigious country. That's why we see all those highway billboards that say, "Need a lawyer?" and why lawyers often earn a handsome salary. So in terms of executive reach or overreach and being sued for it, it's really not all that different this time around, in my mind. What is different, though, is this. The Trump administration has been moving much faster than its predecessors, and some might argue that our current president is also much more aggressive in his actions than his predecessors. But not being slow and not being nice does not automatically make him and his team unconstitutional. As I mentioned before, what would make this an actual constitutional crisis in my mind would be if some of the lawsuits against the Trump administration make it up to the Supreme Court, the ultimate arbiter. And the Supreme Court rules that one or some of President Trump's actions are unconstitutional. And Trump ignores the Supreme Court and continues on his merry way with whatever he's been doing. All this has to happen for us to be in an actual and grave constitutional crisis. And none of this has happened yet. As I've said before, there is a lot going on at the moment, but nothing that's taken place so far and that we're aware of is so egregious that it would, 1, change my belief that treasuries are still the safest, most liquid fixed income investment in the world. 2, make me think that treasuries, agency bonds, money market funds, CDs, and cash under my mattress, which I don't have, are less safe now than they were before Inauguration Day. And 3, motivate me to move our hard-earned US dollars to a foreign country, gold, crypto, or whatever other alternatives that some of you have emailed us about. So, as I just said, the moment to really, truly worry, in my view, is if President Trump, or any administration for that matter, ignores the Supreme Court and continues on their merry way with whatever they've been doing. That would be an actual and serious constitutional crisis, and I hope I'm not going to see such a scenario play out in my lifetime. If that were to happen, though, then we would need to reevaluate treasuries as a safe haven, all our other investments, and a lot of other things for that matter. But that point of reevaluation is not now. And as usual, we will continue to follow developments and address your questions and concerns to the extent possible on this channel so that you can be among the first to know what's going on. All right, members, super savers, and bond course fans, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. And as always, if you want to learn more about treasuries and bond investing, especially while bond yields are still quite attractive, then check out this video here on our beginner and intermediate level bond courses. And one final note, thanks to all of you who've been watching, commenting, and sharing Ava and Caitlin's videos with your friends and family, and also for all the amazing ideas you've been giving them about future videos. For those of you who might be interested or know others who might be, here's what they've been up to. This video here from Ava talks about the magic of compound interest. I believe one of you has already shared it with your 9-year-old, so thank you, and I'm sure your 9-year-old will thank you one day as well. And this one here from Caitlin goes through 4 top broker sign-on bonuses for new customers. And this second one from Ava is a favorite of mine. President Trump gets rid of the penny. I've also linked all of them below for easy reference. And see you again very soon with more brand new wealth-building content for your financial journey.